Picture a world where the line between magic and machinery is so thin it almost disappears. A world where clockwork elephants mark the hours with moving figures and automated flutes play melodies without a musician in sight. Where flying machines take to the skies centuries before the Wright brothers, and where complex astronomical devices predict the movements of planets with startling precision. This isn't science fiction, it's the untold story of the Middle Ages, an era we often imagine as dark and backward, yet one that secretly brimmed with engineering marvels so advanced, most people at the time couldn't even begin to understand them. These weren't just machines, they were dreams given form, built by inventors whose names have been all but erased from history, visionaries who dared to imagine the impossible in an age of superstition and limited technology. Today, we're setting out on a journey to uncover 23 of these extraordinary minds, obscure medieval inventors whose creations were so far ahead of their time that they were dismissed as witchcraft, madness, or mere fantasy. For centuries, their work was misunderstood, ignored, or simply forgotten, locked away in dusty manuscripts or whispered about in legends. But now, thanks to modern scholarship and a renewed appreciation for historical innovation, we can finally decode their genius and recognize these machines for what they truly were: breathtaking leaps in engineering that laid the groundwork for everything from robotics and automation to aerospace and computational devices. These inventors weren't magicians, they were scientists, artists, and engineers operating in a world not yet ready for their brilliance. As we explore their stories, you'll discover how a 12th century polymath from Turkey built an elaborate elephant clock that symbolized cultural unity through hydraulics and automation, how an English monk soared through the skies in a homemade glider, and how anonymous engineers designed war machines and astronomical clocks that still leave experts in awe. Their inventions blur the boundaries between science and sorcery, art and mechanics, curiosity and courage. This is more than a history lesson. It's a reclaiming of legacy, a chance to honor those whose light was hidden for too long. So settle in and open your mind to the possibility that the past holds far more wonder than we've ever been taught. Together, we'll resurrect these lost legends and reshape everything you thought you knew about human ingenuity. Our journey begins in the lush, scholarly courts of 12th century Anatolia, where one man's imagination gave birth to a machine of such profound complexity and beauty that it would not be fully appreciated for 800 years. Ismail al-Jazari was not just an inventor, he was a visionary polymath, a chief engineer in the service of the Artukid dynasty, who saw the world as a series of interconnected mechanical puzzles waiting to be solved. His masterwork, the elephant clock, stands as a breathtaking testament to this worldview. Picture this, a life-sized sculpted elephant, adorned with a magnificent howdah on its back, which itself supports an intricate castle-like structure. At the top, a phoenix prepares to rotate and drop a ball into the mouth of a dragon. On the elephant's shoulders, two serpents coil. This was not a static sculpture. It was a hydraulic symphony set in motion every half hour. The genius of the clock lay in its beautifully orchestrated use of water power. Hidden inside the elephant was a complex system of weights, floats, and pulleys. A water tank filled at a constant rate, and as a float rose, it would trigger a series of levers and gears. This would set the entire spectacle into motion. The phoenix would rotate, the serpents would slither down, and automated figures ascribe. A mahout would move to mark the passage of time with a series of clicks, drops, and chimes. But al-Jazari's intention went far beyond mere timekeeping. Each element was a deliberate nod to a different great culture. The elephant represented India, the dragon China, the phoenix Persia, the waterwork Egypt, and the automated figures the Hellenistic traditions of Greece. It was a mechanical United Nations, a symbol of cultural unity and diplomatic harmony engineered for a ruler's court. Al-Jazari meticulously documented this and dozens of other inventions in his groundbreaking book, The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. This wasn't just a catalogue, it was a detailed instruction manual, complete with diagrams and assembly guides for everything from water-raising pumps to automated musical bands powered by water wheels. He didn't just build these devices, he engineered them to be replicated, ensuring his knowledge would be passed on. Yet, for centuries, many who encountered descriptions of his work dismissed it as elaborate toys or even sorcery, failing to grasp the sophisticated principles of automation, control systems, and feedback loops that operated within them. They saw the magic show, but completely missed the mechanical magician behind the curtain. Today, the world has finally caught up to al-Jazari's brilliance. Modern engineers and historians of technology hail him as the undisputed father of robotics. His use of camshafts, cranks, and valves to create programmable machines with minimal human intervention laid the essential groundwork for everything from the automated looms of the Industrial Revolution to the assembly line robots in modern factories. Contemporary artists and engineers have even built full-scale, functioning replicas of the elephant clock, proving not only that his designs worked flawlessly, but that they represent a fusion of art and science we still strive to achieve. His legacy is a powerful reminder that true genius often isn't recognized in its own time, but patiently waits for the future to unveil its secrets. From the intricate, water-powered certainty of al-Jazari's clock, we now turn to a far more speculative and enigmatic mind, one who dared to sketch the impossible. Imagine a lone French traveler in the 13th century, a master mason journeying across Europe with a precious notebook in his possession. This was Villard de Honnecourt, and his sketchbook is one of the most fascinating and perplexing documents to survive from the Middle Ages. It isn't a formal treatise or a proud manifesto. It's a working journal, a personal brain dump filled with everything from precise architectural plans for cathedral piers and towers to detailed studies of insects, people, and animals. But scattered amongst these practical drawings are something else entirely: bizarre, captivating designs for machines that seemingly operate on their own power. Villard was obsessively trying to solve one of engineering's oldest and most tantalizing riddles, the dream of perpetual motion. His most famous design for this self-sustaining engine is the overbalanced wheel. Villard's sketch shows a large wheel with a series of hinged hammers or weights arranged around its rim. His theory was beautifully simple. As the wheel turned, the hammers on one side would swing out further due to centrifugal force, making that side heavier and pulling the wheel down, while the hammers on the rising side would fold in, making that side lighter. This imbalance, he believed, would create a continuous rotation, a wheel that would turn forever without any external source of energy. Of course, we now understand the laws of thermodynamics that make such a device impossible. The energy lost to friction would eventually stop any such machine. But to dismiss Villard's work as a mere failure is to completely miss its profound significance. His wheel wasn't a dead end, it was a starting point. It was a brilliant, tangible expression of a question that has driven scientific inquiry for centuries. How can we harness energy? He was conducting a thought experiment with pen and parchment, pushing the boundaries of what his world believed was possible. This blend of sharp-eyed observation and almost mystical belief is the key to understanding the medieval mind. Villard wasn't just a dreamer, he was a hands-on craftsman who built the soaring cathedrals of the Gothic era. He understood weight, force, leverage, and geometry from a deeply practical standpoint. Yet, he also existed in a world where faith and reason were not yet separate, where the mysteries of the universe were seen as divine puzzles to be solved. His notebook includes a drawing of a mechanical eagle that turns its head toward the deacon during the gospel reading, a device meant to inspire awe and reinforce faith through engineering. For him, there was no contradiction in designing a practical sawmill powered by water and a speculative machine powered by its own ingenuity. Both were acts of creation, attempts to impose human order and wonder onto the natural world. For a long time, modern historians did indeed view these perpetual motion sketches as charming follies, the whimsical doodles of an otherwise brilliant architect. They saw the practical cathedral plans as his real work and the self-turning wheels as flights of fancy. But a closer look tells a different story. Recent analyses by historians of technology have noticed something remarkable in his drawings, an early, crude form of an escapement mechanism. This is the critical component that would later become the heart of every mechanical clock, the device that regulates the release of energy, turning a continuous force into measured, individual ticks. Villard may not have perfected it, but he was groping toward the principle. His work provides a crucial link in the chain of invention, showing that the foundational ideas for precision timekeeping were being explored in artistic workshops decades before they appeared in clock towers. His notebooks were studied and pored over for centuries, and it is almost certain that a young, voraciously curious Leonardo da Vinci encountered them, seeing in Villard's struggles a kindred spirit wrestling with the same fundamental problems of force and motion. Villard de Honnecourt's true legacy is not a working machine, but a mindset. He represents the raw, unfiltered curiosity that is the absolute lifeblood of innovation. He dared to draw what he could not build, to ask questions for which there were not yet answers. His sketchbook is a window into the creative spirit of an entire era, a reminder that progress is never a straight line from failure to success. It is a messy, beautiful, and often illogical process built upon bold attempts, glorious failures, and ideas that are just too far ahead of their time to be realized. He teaches us that to innovate is to embrace the unknown, even if the first step is a wheel that will never turn on its own. While Villard de Honnecourt was sketching theoretical wonders in France, across the English Channel, a man was actually building a machine of almost unimaginable complexity, a device that would turn a monastery's wall into a window to the cosmos. Richard of Wallingford was no ordinary monk. Appointed abbot of St. Albans Abbey in 1327, he was also a brilliant mathematician and astronomer, a man whose mind operated on a celestial scale. And he carried out his life's work under a shadow of immense personal suffering, afflicted by a severe case of leprosy that slowly ravaged his body. Yet, this physical decay stood in stark contrast to the luminous, intricate clock he willed into existence. This wasn't just a timepiece, it was a mechanical universe, a complex simulation of the heavens that could predict lunar and solar eclipses, track the ever-shifting paths of the sun, moon, and stars, and even account for the irregular orbit of the moon with a gear train that mimicked the mathematical intricacies of the universe itself. The clock's centerpiece was a vast astrolabe-like dial, a spinning map of the sky with gears representing each celestial body. One of its most revolutionary features was the Wheel of Fortune, a gear that perfectly modeled the uneven motion of the moon as it speeds up and slows down in its elliptical orbit around Earth. This was a problem of such mathematical sophistication that it demonstrated a grasp of astronomy far beyond simple time-telling for the monks of St. Albans, the clock would have been a constant source of fascination and perhaps unease. Every hour, as its bells rang out and its automated figures likely performed a small procession, it served as a powerful reminder of divine order. Yet, its ability to predict celestial events like eclipses often seen as omens or divine displeasure must have felt like peering into God's private calendar. Some surely saw it as the height of devotional technology, a tool to better understand God's creation. Others undoubtedly viewed it with deep suspicion, a dangerous act of hubris that attempted to mechanize the mysteries of the heavens, to contain the infinite within a cage of finite, grinding gears. For centuries after Richard's death, the true nature of his clock was lost. It fell into disrepair, and later descriptions failed to capture its full glory, often reducing it to the status of a curious, oversized ornament. It wasn't until the 1950s that historian John North meticulously pieced together the original surviving manuscripts, including Richard's own complex treatise detailing the clock's design. This painstaking work revealed the stunning truth. The St. Albans clock was arguably the most advanced mechanical device on Earth for its time, a monumental leap in both precision engineering and computational thought. Modern experts recognize it not just as a clock, but as an analog computer. Its complex gearing systems performed calculations about celestial mechanics that would otherwise require extensive mathematical tables and laborious manual computation. In this way, Richard of Wallingford built a bridge between the ancient world of observational astronomy and the future of automated calculation, a direct precursor to the planetariums and orreries of the 18th century, and even the core principles of modern computing. Richard's story is a profound testament to the human spirit's ability to transcend immense physical limitation through intellectual triumph. Confined by his illness and his monastic vows, he used the resources and knowledge at his disposal to project his mind into the heavens and then bring a piece of that cosmos down to earth, encasing it in iron and brass. He perfectly embodies the medieval scholar's quest to find harmony between faith and reason, to use science not to challenge God, but to illuminate the magnificent complexity of his design. His clock was a prayer written in gear teeth, a hymn sung in the steady, ticking rhythm of a mechanical universe. If the machines of Richard of Wallingford reached for the heavens, our next inventor's creations were firmly grounded in the grim and gritty realities of earthly conflict, proving that the drive to innovate is often fueled by the urgent demands of war. Enter Konrad Kyeser, a 15th-century German engineer and a man who had seen the brutal face of battle firsthand. Having fought in the Crusades and various European conflicts, Kyeser possessed a unique blend of practical military experience and a wildly inventive imagination. While exiled from his homeland, he channeled all of his knowledge and frustration into a single, monumental work, an illustrated manuscript titled Bellefortes, which translates to Strong in War. This wasn't just a book, it was a spectacular catalogue of military might, a compilation of over 200 designs for engines of war that ranged from the brutally practical to the utterly fantastical. It stands as one of the most important and visually striking technological documents of the late Middle Ages, a testament to an era where engineering and art were inseparable partners in the quest for power. Kyeser's pages are a whirlwind of mechanical marvels that seem to leap from the page. He envisioned an armored assault chariot, a rolling fortress propelled by men turning cranks inside, its sides bristling with guns and spears, a clear conceptual ancestor of the modern tank. He drew detailed plans for multi-barreled Ribbeldequin guns, arrays of small cannons mounted on a cart that could unleash a devastating volley of fire, anticipating the rotary cannons and artillery of centuries later. There were designs for portable bridges to quickly cross enemy moats, trebuchets that could hurl diseased corpses over castle walls in an early form of biological warfare, and even what appears to be a giant rocket battery with numerous tubes designed to launch projectiles in a terrifying salvo. One of his most intriguing ideas was for an automated crossbow, a device that used a complex system of gears and pulleys to repeatedly fire bolts without the need for a soldier to manually reload, a medieval attempt at a machine gun. His imagination even extended to the psychological, with designs for fearsome dragon-shaped incendiary devices meant to terrify enemy horses and troops. For a long time, many historians dismissed Bellefortes as a work of pure fantasy, an artist's indulgent daydreams with little basis in reality. They saw these elaborate drawings as impractical, too complex to build, or simply exaggerated for dramatic effect. But this interpretation misses the crucial context of Kyeser's life and the purpose of his book. He was not a naive dreamer. He was a military veteran writing for an audience of nobles and generals, men who needed every possible advantage on the battlefield. His manuscript was less a strict construction manual and more a book of ideas, a source of inspiration and a display of technical virtuosity meant to attract a wealthy patron. In this sense, it was a portfolio showcasing the incredible possibilities of military engineering. While some devices were certainly speculative, many were based on sound mechanical principles that were within the grasp of contemporary craftsmen, using levers, gears, counterweights, and springs in innovative combinations. Modern experts in the history of technology now view Kyeser's work with far greater respect. They see in his multi-barreled guns the genesis of volley fire technology. His armored chariot represents a vital step in the evolution of protected mobile warfare. The very act of compiling and illustrating these ideas was itself a form of innovation, spreading concepts and inspiring other engineers across Europe. His work directly influenced the next generation of Renaissance engineers, including the likes of Toccola and even Leonardo da Vinci, who would later sketch similar machines. Kyeser's legacy is a powerful challenge to the outdated notion of the medieval period as a technological dark age. It reveals a world already engaged in a sophisticated arms race, where engineers were actively experimenting with automation, ballistics, and combined arms tactics. Bellefortes shows us that the drive to gain an edge in conflict has always been a powerful engine for technological progress, pushing the boundaries of materials, mechanics, and even the human imagination itself. From the drawing boards of speculative warfare, we now travel to the sun-baked cliffs of Spain, where a master of precision timekeeping was tasked with solving a problem of life and death, a city's desperate thirst. The story of Juanelo Turriano is one of breathtaking ingenuity meeting heartbreaking neglect. Born Giovanni Torriani in Cremona, Italy, he was a clockmaker of such unparalleled skill that he became the personal horologist to the most powerful man in the world, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. For the emperor, Turriano crafted exquisite astrological clocks and automated planets, tiny mechanical universes that mirrored the heavens. But his greatest challenge and his most enduring legacy would be a machine of immense earthly scale and purpose, designed not for an emperor's study, but for an entire city clinging to a rock. The ancient city of Toledo was a natural fortress, perched high on a steep hill, surrounded on three sides by a deep gorge carved by the Tagus River. This geography made it nearly impregnable to attack, but it also created an agonizing paradox. Its citizens could look down every day upon a massive, flowing river, yet had no way to bring that vital water up the 300-foot vertical climb to their homes. For centuries, the only solution was a grueling, day-long caravan of donkeys and men trudging up a perilous winding path. In 1551, the city fathers, knowing of Turriano's genius for the emperor, presented him with an audacious challenge: harness the river. The result was the Artificio de Juanilo, or Juanilo's device, a wooden marvel that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. This was no simple pump. Turriano's machine was a masterpiece of sustainable engineering, a Rube Goldberg device of stunning elegance and complexity that operated entirely on the principle of energy transfer, requiring no external power source like wind, animals, or human labor. It was a chain of motion, a beautiful dance of physics. The entire system was set in motion by a large water wheel placed in the powerful current of the Tagus River. As the wheel turned, it drove a series of wooden gears and camshafts connected to long, articulated arms. These arms, moving with a rhythmic, almost living motion, operated a succession of wooden boxes and buckets. The true genius was in its staging. The machine couldn't lift the water the full height in one go. Instead, Turriano designed a cascading series of small lifting stations, each one raising the water a short distance and then passing it to the next module. Each stage used counterweights and clever leverage to minimize the energy required, making the entire system incredibly efficient. It was a perpetual motion machine in the most practical sense, powered by the river it was lifting, a self-sustaining hydraulic loop that delivered life-giving water to the highest point of the city, where it flowed into a reservoir and through the streets of Toledo. For nearly a century, the Artificio worked, its rhythmic creaking and groaning a constant soundtrack to the city's life, a symbol of human triumph over geography. Contemporary accounts describe it with a sense of awe, a mechanical wonder that drew visitors from across Europe. Yet, this is where the story takes a tragic turn. The financial agreement for the machine's maintenance was fraught with ambiguity. The city council and the cathedral chapter argued over who was responsible for its upkeep. As wooden parts wore down and gears cracked, no one was willing to pay for the repairs. The very man who understood its intricate workings, Juanilo himself, died without having trained a sufficient number of apprentices to the necessary level of expertise. Slowly, inevitably, the great machine ground to a halt. Its silence was more profound than its noise had ever been. Within a few generations, its precise mechanics were forgotten, its existence fading into local legend. Many scholars, looking at the ruined, skeletal remains, dismissed the old stories as exaggerations, a classic tall tale about a magical water device. The Artificio became a myth. It was only through meticulous historical detective work in the 19th and 20th centuries, poring over municipal records, payment receipts, and descriptions from travelers, that the truth was confirmed. Engineers and historians, using Turriano's own known principles from his clockwork, have since created detailed models and computer simulations that prove not only that the machine was possible, but that it was a brilliant application of Renaissance mechanics to civil engineering. Today, we recognize Juanelo Turriano not just as a brilliant clockmaker, but as a pioneering hydraulic engineer. His Artificio stands as a powerful and poignant lesson in the fragility of knowledge. It shows that a technology, no matter how brilliant and beneficial, can be lost not through failure, but through simple neglect, bureaucratic indifference, and a failure to preserve the deep, tacit understanding of how it works. It is a monument to the idea that maintaining an invention can be as important as creating it in the first place. From the tangible, life-sustaining hydraulics of Juanelo Turriano, we now journey back to an earlier, more mystical time, to a man whose intellect was so dazzling and whose devices so perplexing that his contemporaries could only explain them by believing he had bargained with the devil himself. Gerbert of Orilac stands as one of the most fascinating and misunderstood figures of the entire Middle Ages, a scholar monk who would one day ascend to the very peak of spiritual power as Pope Sylvester II, yet whose true legacy was forged not in the halls of the Vatican, but in the vibrant, knowledge-rich libraries of Islamic Spain. To understand Gerbert is to understand a pivotal moment in history, a crucial conduit through which the vast scientific knowledge of the Arab world first began to trickle into a Europe still struggling to emerge from the intellectual stagnation of the early medieval period. His story begins with an insatiable curiosity. As a young monk in the Benedictine order, Gerbert's brilliant mind quickly outgrew the confines of the traditional European curriculum, which was then still largely based on the limited surviving texts of Roman antiquity. His quest for deeper knowledge led him across the Pyrenees to the Catalan monasteries of Spain, territories then under Muslim rule. Here he found himself at the frontier of a scientific golden age. In the libraries of cities like Barcelona and possibly even Cordoba, he was exposed to texts that were utterly revolutionary for a European mind. The astronomical and mathematical works of Greek thinkers like Ptolemy and Euclid, which had been preserved, commented upon, and vastly expanded by generations of Islamic scholars. This was an intellectual awakening. Gerbert didn't just read these texts, he absorbed their methods and their spirit of inquiry. He became a passionate evangelist for this new knowledge, and he brought back to Europe two conceptual tools that would fundamentally reshape Western science: Arabic numerals, including the revolutionary concept of zero, and the abacus, which he redesigned with new, more efficient calculation methods. But Gerbert was far more than just an importer of ideas. He was a masterful practical inventor. He took this theoretical knowledge and used it to build devices that seemed to his peers like something from a sorcerer's workshop. His most famous creation was a revolutionary form of the astrolabe, the medieval world's most sophisticated handheld computer for navigating the heavens. While traditional astrolabes were flat, planispheric discs, Gerbert designed a breathtakingly complex spherical astrolabe. Imagine a celestial globe, a hollow sphere with a map of the major stars etched onto its surface, nested within another sphere representing the Earth. By aligning this intricate armillary sphere with the actual night sky, a user could calculate the positions of stars, the time of night, and even the dates of religious festivals with a degree of precision that was simply unimaginable to most of his contemporaries. He is also credited with constructing one of the first mechanical clocks in Europe, driven by a descending weight and a system of gears, a device that used technology to model the cosmos itself, marking a profound shift from measuring time by the sun and water to regulating it with machinery. To the educated elite of the Church, these were marvels of God's creation, tools to better understand the divine order. But to the vast majority of people, including many of his fellow clerics, they were utterly incomprehensible. How could a sphere of brass and wire predict the movement of stars? How could a box of gears tell time independent of the sun? In a world where knowledge was limited and fear was rampant, the only logical explanation was dark magic. Whispers began to circulate, weaving a dark legend around the brilliant scholar. It was said Gerbert had stolen a book of forbidden knowledge from a Saracen wizard in Spain. Others claimed he had a brazen head, an automaton made of bronze that could answer any question yes or no. The most persistent rumor, one that would haunt his name for centuries, was that he had gained his preternatural understanding of the cosmos by making a pact with the devil, trading his soul for knowledge that no mere mortal should possess. This reputation as a necromancer pope overshadowed his genuine achievements for nearly 1,000 years, reducing one of the greatest scientific minds of his age to a lurid character in cautionary tales. It is only in the last century that historians have peeled back these layers of superstition and myth to reveal Gerbert's true historical significance. We now see him not as a magician, but as a critical bridge, a pivotal transmitter of the classical and Islamic scientific traditions that would eventually fuel the Renaissance. His spherical astrolabe was a masterpiece of practical astronomy, and his work on timekeeping laid the essential groundwork for the great mechanical clocks that would later adorn cathedrals across Europe. Gerbert's tragic story is a powerful and timeless lesson in how fear and ignorance can weaponize innovation, turning brilliance into heresy and a thirst for knowledge into a proof of demonic allegiance. He embodied the very spirit of scientific inquiry in an age not yet ready to receive it, a beacon of light that was mistaken for a hellfire. While the brilliant minds of individual inventors like Gerbert were being obscured by superstition, another form of technological genius was emerging from the heart of a revolution, one so powerful and effective that its creators were collectively erased by the chaos of war itself. The story of the Hussite war machines is not about a single-named genius, but about the anonymous, pragmatic collaboration of craftsmen, soldiers, and theologians who together engineered a military revolution in 15th century Bohemia. This was innovation born from pure desperation. The Hussites, followers of the reformer Jan Hus who had been burned at the stake for heresy, found themselves surrounded by enemies. The Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor had declared a series of crusades against them, sending wave after wave of heavily armored knights and professional soldiers to crush the rebellion. The Hussites were massively outnumbered, outfunded, and out-equipped. They were farmers, townspeople, and lower nobility, not a standing army. Their only hope for survival lay not in matching their enemies, but in outthinking them completely. Their solution was a brutally elegant synthesis of existing technologies into something entirely new, the war wagon fortress. Picture an ordinary, large farm wagon, the kind used to haul grain or hay. Now imagine it reforged as a mobile mini-fortress. Its wooden sides were reinforced with thick planking, and loopholes were cut into them for firing weapons. Each wagon carried a small arsenal, handguns, crossbows, long hooks, and most fearsomely, early muzzle-loaded cannons called hoofness, a word that would eventually give us the English term howitzer. But the true innovation wasn't the wagon itself, it was how they were used. These wagons were never meant to charge. Instead, they were driven into a pre-arranged defensive position and chained together into a formidable, improvised wall. Teams of soldiers would then dig a quick trench around the perimeter, throwing the earth up against the wheels to create an even more stable barricade. The result was an instant, movable castle that could be erected on any open field. The tactics employed within this moving fortress were a masterpiece of combined arms warfare centuries before the term was coined. It was a deadly, coordinated ballet. When the enemy cavalry charged, they were met not by a thin line of infantry, but by a solid wall of wood and iron. The cannons and handguns inside the wagon fort would unleash a thunderous volley at point-blank range, shredding the knights' horses and breaking the momentum of their charge. As the disoriented and wounded knights stumbled against the barricade, Hussite soldiers wielding long flails, modified agricultural tools originally used for threshing grain, would reach through the gaps to drag men from their saddles and crush their armor. Meanwhile, crossbowmen and gunmen, protected by the wagon walls, could reload and fire with relative safety. If the enemy somehow managed to breach the defenses, the chains connecting the wagons could be quickly released, allowing the individual units to pivot and defend themselves independently. And when the enemy was finally broken and retreating, the Hussites wouldn't just sit in their fortress. They would unleash their own small, agile cavalry from behind the wagon lines to pursue and harry the fleeing forces, turning a defensive victory into a rout. To the Crusaders who faced them, this was not warfare as they understood it. It was sorcery, How could a rabble of peasants repeatedly annihilate the finest chivalric armies of Europe? They saw the smoke and fire of the gunpowder weapons, heard the deafening roar of the hoofness, and witnessed their glorious charges dissolve into bloody chaos against a wall of farm carts. It was easier to believe that dark magic was at work than to accept that their entire concept of martial honor and knightly combat had been rendered obsolete by a group of ingenious heretics. Contemporary chronicles from the Crusader side often attribute Hussite victories to divine wrath or demonic assistance, completely missing the meticulous planning, drilling, and mechanical innovation that made their success possible. The true inventors, the blacksmiths who forged the cannon barrels, the carpenters who designed the reinforced wagon frames, the tacticians who devised the formations were lost to history, their contributions absorbed into the collective effort of the cause. Modern military historians look back on the Hussite-Wagenburg tactics with immense respect, seeing in them the clear conceptual forerunners of everything from the tercio formations of the Spanish Empire to the combined arms doctrine of modern armies. Those wagon forts were the ancestors of the tank, a mobile, armored platform that provided protected firepower and could dominate a battlefield. The integration of gunpowder artillery with infantry defense and cavalry counterattack was a revolutionary approach. The anonymity of these inventors is a powerful reminder that innovation is not always the domain of the lone genius sketching in a notebook. Sometimes it is the product of communal necessity, a desperate struggle for survival that forces a leap in technology and tactics. Their legacy is a testament to the idea that the most powerful inventions are often those that are practical, scalable, and born from the need to overcome impossible odds. While the Hussites were redefining warfare on the ground with their collective ingenuity, in the peaceful university town of Padua, a single individual was embarking on a solitary, 16-year quest to map the heavens with a machine of such intricate beauty that it would become one of the most legendary lost devices of the medieval world. Giovanni da Dondi was a man of two worlds, a respected physician who healed human bodies and a brilliant astronomer who sought to understand the celestial clockwork that governed them. His life's masterwork, the Astraium, was born from this unique fusion of science and art, a monumental effort to create a tangible model of the universe as it was understood in the 14th century. This was not merely a clock to tell the hour, it was a seven-faced mechanical symphony, each dial dedicated to tracking the complex movements of a different celestial body, the moon, the sun, and the 5 known planets, all moving in perfect, gear-driven harmony according to the ancient Ptolemaic system. Da Dondi's challenge was immense. The planets, as observed from Earth, do not move in simple, uniform circles across the sky. They speed up, slow down, and even appear to reverse course in loops known as retrograde motion. To replicate this within a machine required an extraordinary depth of mathematical understanding and mechanical ingenuity. The Astrarium's over 100 precisely cut brass gears were designed to solve these astronomical puzzles. For the moon, he crafted a mechanism that mimicked its variable speed. For the planets Mercury and Venus, he engineered systems that replicated their elongated orbits and their positions relative to the Sun. The entire apparatus was a physical manifestation of complex astronomical calculations, a computer made of brass and iron that could predict the position of any planet on any given date with an accuracy that would have required a skilled scholar hours of labor with pen, parchment, and complex tables. For the handful of learned scholars who saw it, the Astrarium was the pinnacle of human intellect, a bridge between the abstract world of mathematical theory and the tangible world of mechanical craft. They recognized it for what it was, a revolutionary scientific instrument, but for the vast majority of people, including many wealthy patrons and even fellow clerics, it was an incomprehensible marvel, a dazzling and expensive toy. Some surely saw its mechanization of the heavens as an act of profound hubris, a dangerous attempt to capture the divine dance of the cosmos in a man-made box of whirring gears. It was easier to dismiss it as an eccentric ornament than to grapple with the profound scientific ambition it represented. This misunderstanding, coupled with the sheer fragility of such a complex device, sealed its fate. After Dondi's death, the original Astraium was moved, neglected, and eventually lost to history, its pieces likely scattered and melted down, its genius fading into a few tantalizing descriptions in old manuscripts. For centuries, it existed only as a ghost, a rumor of a machine too fantastic to be real. That is, until the 20th century, when historians and master clockmakers, armed with Dondi's own meticulous surviving writings and drawings, undertook the Herculean task of reconstruction. Building a working model based on his instructions proved it was no myth. It was a feat of engineering that was centuries ahead of its time. These modern reconstructions, now housed in museums, reveal the Astraium's true legacy. It was the undeniable precursor to the planetarium and the modern orrery, but more importantly, it established the very principle of precision timekeeping as a tool for scientific discovery. Dondi didn't just build a clock, he built a machine for testing a model of the universe. His work provided a crucial link between the geared astrolabes of the Islamic world and the complex mechanical calculators of the European Renaissance, directly influencing the great clockmakers who followed. Giovanni Dondi's story is a poignant reminder that the value of an invention is not always recognized in its time, and that the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, even if it takes a lifetime and is misunderstood by all, can plant the seeds for revolutions yet to come. While the intricate clockwork of Dondi's Astraium represented a monumental effort by a single mind, our next story unfolds within a vibrant hub of collaborative genius, a place where the entire known world's knowledge was not just collected, but actively expanded upon through the brilliant work of three brothers. To step into the Baghdad of the 9th century is to step into the epicenter of global intellectual ferment, thanks to the Abbasid caliphs who established the legendary Beit al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom. This was not merely a library, it was a powerhouse of translation, research, and innovation, where scholars from every culture and creed were invited to gather, debate, and push the boundaries of human understanding. And among its most luminous stars were three Persian brothers, Ahmad, Muhammad, and Hassan, collectively known as the Banu Musa, whose collective intellect would produce one of the most important engineering texts of the entire medieval period. Their magnum opus, the Kitab al-Letter 1 E2 5 IYAL, or the Book of Ingenious Devices, is a breathtaking catalogue of mechanical ambition. Within its pages, they detailed designs for over 100 different gadgets and automata, each one a clever application of physics and craftsmanship. But to call them mere gadgets is to miss the point entirely. These were sophisticated machines designed to perform useful tasks automatically, with minimal human intervention. They envisioned self-regulating oil lamps that maintained a constant flame height by using a float valve to control the flow of fuel, a fundamental principle of feedback control that wouldn't be widely adopted for centuries. They designed trick vessels that appeared to defy logic, like a pitcher that would only dispense water if your hand was placed in a certain spot, using cleverly hidden air pressure channels. Their automatic flute player was a programmable musical automaton that used a rotating cylinder with pins, much like a later music box, to actuate levers that would finger the holes of a flute, creating a ghostly, mechanical melody. Perhaps most entertainingly, they created a drinking vessel that would refill itself from a hidden reservoir, a party trick that must have stunned and delighted their guests. The true genius of the Banu Musa brothers lay in their masterful synthesis of existing knowledge and their bold application of it. They were standing on the shoulders of giants, meticulously studying and improving upon the pneumatic works of the ancient Greek hero of Alexandria. But where heroes' devices were often theatrical wonders designed for temple miracles, the Banu Musa brothers infused their designs with a distinctly practical, almost playful Islamic spirit. They weren't just trying to mimic the divine, they were seeking to improve daily life, to create convenience, wonder, and utility through automation. Their devices relied on a deep understanding of what we now call fluid dynamics, pneumatics, and mechanical control systems. They employed conical valves, float chambers, intermittent mechanisms, and non-return valves with a precision that reveals a hands-on familiarity with engineering principles that would not be formally defined for hundreds of years. For a time, their work was celebrated in the enlightened courts of the Islamic world, seen as the pinnacle of philosophical engineering. But as the centuries passed and the center of scientific gravity shifted westward into Europe, their contributions were gradually marginalized. When their book was eventually translated into Latin, many European scholars, dazzled by the devices but divorced from the cultural and intellectual context that produced them, misinterpreted these feats of engineering as mere conjuring tricks or elaborate toys. The profound underlying principles of automation and feedback control were largely overlooked. The devices filed away as curiosities rather than studied as the foundational texts of engineering they truly were. The brothers became footnotes, their names whispered less often than those of the later European inventors who would, in many cases, independently rediscover principles the Banu Musa had already perfected. It is only through the lens of modern engineering that we can finally appreciate the staggering prescience of their work. Today, control systems engineers recognize their self-regulating lamp as an early example of a closed-loop feedback system, the very bedrock of modern automation, from cruise control in your car to the thermostat in your home. Roboticists see their programmable flute player as a conceptual ancestor of musical robots and automated assembly lines. Their work on valves and fluid control is directly relevant to hydraulic engineering. The Banu Musa brothers were not just tinkerers, they were pioneering systems thinkers who understood that machines could be designed to manage themselves. Their legacy forces us to expand our view of the history of technology beyond a purely European narrative and to acknowledge the critical, foundational role played by medieval Islamic science. It was a legacy of global innovation, built upon a shared human curiosity that transcended culture and creed, a legacy that would soon inspire inventors in a very different part of the world. From the collaborative brilliance of the Banu Musa brothers in the bustling intellectual capital of Baghdad, we now set our sights on a quieter, more solitary form of genius, one that unfolded in the scriptoriums of 13th century England. Here, a scholar named Robert Anglicus, whose very name means Robert the Englishman, was engaged in a monumental task, not building a machine of gears and levers, but refining the very tools that would allow humanity to conquer the planet's greatest wilderness, the open ocean. In an age when most sailors navigated by following coastlines, reading the stars, and relying on sheer instinct honed over a lifetime, Robert was attempting to bring mathematical certainty to the art of wayfinding. His workshop was a desk, his materials were parchment and ink, and his inventions were not physical objects, but revolutionary ideas that would transform simple instruments into precision devices for celestial navigation. Robert's greatest contribution was his extensive and deeply insightful commentary on the most important astronomy textbook of the Middle Ages, Johannes de Sacrobosco's Tractatus de Sphera, or Treatise on the Sphere. This wasn't just a dry academic exercise. Within this text, Robert did something extraordinary. He provided incredibly detailed, practical instructions on how to use the two most important navigational tools of the era, the planispheric astrolabe and the mariner's quadrant, to determine a ship's position at sea. He explained with a mathematician's precision how to measure the altitude of the sun at noon or the North Star at night using the astrolabe, a flat, brass disc etched with a map of the heavens. He then detailed the complex calculations needed to convert that angle into a line of latitude. He even ventured into the far more difficult problem of determining longitude, a challenge that would stump navigators for another 500 years by discussing methods involving lunar observations and the timing of eclipses. For the first time, a scholar was systematically translating abstract astronomical theory from the university classroom into a practical manual for the mariner on the deck of a rolling ship. Yet this gift of knowledge was met not with open arms, but with deep suspicion and outright resistance from the very people it was meant to help. The seasoned mariners of the 13th and 14th centuries were a pragmatic and superstitious lot. Theirs was a world of tradition passed down from father to son, where the feel of the wind, the color of the water, and the flight patterns of birds were trusted more than any brass disc covered in mysterious symbols and Arabic numerals. Robert's instruments were fragile, expensive, and notoriously difficult to use on a vessel pitching in heavy seas. More importantly, they required a level of literacy and mathematical understanding that was far beyond the average sailor. To these men, the astrolabe was not a tool of liberation but one of intimidation, a complex academic toy that threatened to replace their hard-won experiential knowledge with confusing calculations they could not verify. They feared that relying on such a device would lead them astray, quite literally, into unknown and dangerous waters. This cultural chasm between the theoretical scholar and the practical sailor meant that Robert's groundbreaking work was largely confined to the libraries of the educated elite for generations. The tragic irony is that Robert Anglicus was in fact their greatest ally. His entire project was an attempt to reduce the terrifying uncertainties of ocean travel, to replace guesswork with geometry and fear with fact. He understood that the old methods, while sometimes effective, were hopelessly inadequate for the ambitious voyages that lay ahead. His meticulous instructions laid the essential intellectual groundwork for the entire age of exploration. The pioneering Portuguese navigators like Prince Henry the Navigator, who began systematically exploring the African coast in the 15th century, did so using techniques and instruments that were direct descendants of the principles Robert had outlined 2 centuries earlier. They employed improved versions of the quadrant and the astrolabe, and they relied on navigational manuals that echoed his methods. He had provided the crucial bridge, the missing link between the abstract cosmos studied by astronomers and the urgent, practical need of sailors to know where they were on the trackless sea. Modern historians now see Robert not as a failed innovator, but as a classic example of a visionary whose ideas simply had to wait for the world to catch up. His patience and precision in documenting these methods ensured they were preserved, ready to be rediscovered and implemented when the economic and political will for exploration finally emerged. He represents the often overlooked power of the theoretician, the thinker whose pen can be as transformative as any blacksmith's hammer. By daring to apply the esoteric knowledge of the stars to the gritty reality of the waves, Robert Anglicus helped chart the course to a more connected planet. And just as his instruments allowed mariners to navigate by looking up to the heavens, our next inventor would take that same celestial inspiration in a far more daring and literal direction, building a machine meant not for measuring the sky, but for flying through it. If the precise calculations of Robert Anglicus represented a mind seeking to master the heavens from the safety of the ground, our next story is one of breathtaking, raw courage, a leap of faith, quite literally, into the unknown. High atop the tower of Malmesbury Abbey in 11th century England, a young monk named Eilmer stood peering over the edge, the wind whipping at his robes. But he was not there for prayer or contemplation. Strapped to his arms and feet were a set of homemade wings, crafted from wood and cloth, a desperate attempt to emulate the birds he had studied so intently. Below him lay the abbey courtyard, a hard stone landing that promised nothing but pain. With a heart pounding with equal parts terror and exhilaration, Eilmer took a running start and threw himself into the open air. For a few glorious, silent moments, he did not fall. He flew. The chronicler William of Malmesbury would later record that the brave monk soared for a distance of over 200 meters, the length of several football fields, before a sudden gust of wind caught his makeshift wings, sending him into a panicked stall and a devastating crash that shattered both his legs. This was not a myth or a parable. It was one of history's first and most audacious documented experiments in manned flight. Eilmer's inspiration was as ancient as his ambition was new. He was a scholar deeply versed in the classics, and the story of Icarus and Daedalus from Greek mythology would have been a powerful and cautionary tale for any medieval mind. But where the myth warned of the dangers of hubris, of flying too close to the sun, Eilmer seems to have focused on the mechanics of the legend. He asked a revolutionary question: if Daedalus could craft wings from feathers and wax, could it actually be done? He moved beyond superstitious fear into a mode of empirical observation. He spent hours watching the flight patterns of birds, particularly jackdaws, noting how they caught the air, how they angled their wings to turn, how they spread their feathers to slow their descent. His design was a product of this biomimicry, a primitive hang glider that used the basic principles of aerodynamics, whether he knew the term or not, to generate lift. He understood that he needed a large surface area to catch the air, and that he needed to launch from a high point to give himself time to glide. This was not a random jump. It was a calculated test based on observation and reason. The aftermath of his flight tells us everything about how his world viewed such daring innovation. His fellow monks saw the event as a mixture of the miraculous and the profoundly foolish. They marveled that he had flown at all, a feat they attributed as much to divine intervention as to engineering. But they also saw the crash as a clear sign of God's disapproval, a punishment for overreaching his mortal station. Eilmer himself, now lame for the rest of his life, reportedly analyzed his failure with a cool, scientific detachment. He concluded that his mistake was not the act of flying itself, but a technical error in the design. He had forgotten to add a tail to his craft, which would have provided the stability needed to counteract that fateful gust of wind. He wanted to try again, to build a new pair of wings incorporating this crucial insight, but the abbey's abbot, horrified by the entire affair, strictly forbade any further attempts. The spark of a revolutionary idea was extinguished by authority and fear. For centuries, Eilmer's story was dismissed by historians as exactly what his abbot feared: a foolish legend, a monastic tall tale used to warn against vanity. It was comfortably filed away with other medieval myths of flying machines and magical feats, but the advent of modern aeronautics forced a dramatic reassessment. When pioneering aviators and engineers of the 19th and 20th centuries began to seriously study the history of their field, they revisited the chronicles of Eilmer's flight. They were stunned. The distance he was said to have traveled, over 200 meters, was not only plausible for a rudimentary glider launched from a high tower, it was incredibly impressive. His intuitive understanding of the need for a tail for longitudinal stability was a fundamental principle of aviation design that wouldn't be formally rediscovered until the Wright brothers' breakthroughs centuries later. Aerospace historians now see Eilmer not as a cautionary tale, but as a pioneering experimentalist. He represents the very essence of the scientific method: observe, hypothesize, test, analyze, and refine. He was willing to risk his own body to test a theory, and he had the intellectual honesty to diagnose the flaw in his design after the fact. Eilmer of Malmesbury's legacy is a powerful testament to the human spirit's relentless desire to transcend its limits. He looked at the sky not as a divine realm forbidden to man, but as a frontier to be explored and understood. His broken legs were the price of a profound step forward, a step that would inspire later dreamers from Leonardo da Vinci to Otto Lilienthal. He teaches us that progress is often born from a willingness to appear foolish, to crash spectacularly in the pursuit of something glorious. His story is a monument to the idea that the greatest innovations begin not with certainty, but with a courageous question and the boldness to leap into the unknown in search of an answer. While Eilmer of Malmesbury looked to the skies with wings of wood and faith, our next visionary turned his gaze in the opposite direction, venturing deep into the earth to confront the brutal, practical challenges of extracting the very resources that built the modern world. Georgius Agricola, a 16th-century German physician and scholar, found his life's calling not in the clean, theoretical halls of academia, but in the soot-choked, dangerous world of the Saxon mines. His monumental work, De Re Metallica, on the nature of metals is far more than a dusty Latin tome. It is a breathtakingly detailed visual and technical encyclopedia that unveils a hidden universe of underground innovation, a world of massive water-powered pumps, ingenious ventilation systems, and complex ore-crushing machines that were the unsung engines of the pre-industrial age. Agricola took a trade shrouded in superstition and mystery and illuminated it with the brilliant, systematic light of Renaissance engineering. To understand the magnitude of Agricola's achievement, you must first picture the reality of a 16th-century mine. It was a place of almost unimaginable peril and filth. Men, women, and children worked in near-total darkness, their lungs choked with dust, their bodies constantly threatened by tunnel collapses, flooding, and poisonous air. Mining was widely seen as a grim, almost infernal trade, a necessary evil that was best left unexamined by polite society. Most educated people of the era viewed it with a mixture of fear and disdain, considering it a brutish activity devoid of intellect or artistry. It was into this world that Georgius Agricola, a highly educated doctor, arrived. Appointed as the town physician in the booming mining center of Joachimsthal, his initial mission was to tend to the health of the miners. But he quickly became fascinated by the entire operation, not just the ailments it caused, but the incredible mechanical ingenuity deployed to overcome its immense challenges. He realized that the true story wasn't the danger. It was the brilliant engineering solutions being invented on the spot to combat that danger. For over 25 years, Agricola meticulously observed, interviewed, and documented every aspect of mining and metallurgy. De Re Metallica is the staggering result, a 12-volume masterpiece filled with exquisitely detailed woodcut illustrations that bring this mechanical world to life. The pages explode with innovation. He depicts massive water wheels, far larger than any used for grinding grain, harnessed to power long series of piston pumps that could lift water hundreds of feet from the deepest mine shafts, a cascading chain of mechanical muscle fighting against constant flooding. He illustrates sophisticated ventilation systems using giant bellows and carefully designed partitions to channel fresh air through miles of tunnels, combating the stagnant, lethal gases that could suffocate a crew in minutes. He details ore crushers powered by animal treadmills and trip hammers that could pound rock into powder with relentless efficiency, saving thousands of hours of manual labor. Perhaps most impressively, he shows elaborate hauling systems with reversible windlasses and conveyor belts made of linked leather buckets, designed to lift both men and materials safely to the surface. This wasn't just observation, it was a comprehensive catalogue of mechanical problem-solving. Yet, for all its practical brilliance, De Re Metallica was largely misunderstood by Agricola's own contemporaries outside the mining community. The educated elite who browsed its pages often saw the dramatic illustrations of dark, cavernous mines and strange machines as curiosities, illustrations of a gloomy underworld rather than a textbook of cutting-edge engineering. They failed to grasp the profound scientific principles at work, the applied hydraulics, pneumatics, and mechanics that these devices represented. The machines were seen as mere tools for a dirty job, not as the direct precursors to the Industrial Revolution that they truly were. The true value of Agricola's work was its systematic approach. He didn't just show one machine, he showed multiple designs for solving the same problem, comparing their efficiency and application. He provided a complete blueprint, a shared body of knowledge that could be adapted and improved upon by engineers across Europe. This prescient compilation of mechanical knowledge would eventually become one of the most influential technical books in history, though its impact was delayed by centuries. When an English translation was finally published in 1512, spearheaded by then-President Herbert Hoover and his wife Lou Henry Hoover, the industrial world was ready to receive it. Engineers of the 18th and 19th centuries recognized in Agricola's pages the foundational concepts for their own steam-powered pumps, elevator systems, and ventilation fans. The direct line from his water-powered piston pumps to Thomas Newcomen's atmospheric steam engine is unmistakable. Agricola had provided the essential bridge between medieval craft and modern industrial engineering, proving that the most powerful innovations are often born from the most urgent, gritty necessities. His work reminds us that true genius often lies not in inventing something from nothing, but in seeing the profound intelligence in the world around us, documenting it, systematizing it, and raising it up for all to see. He took the darkness of the mine and revealed the brilliant light of human ingenuity burning within it. From the deep, resource-rich tunnels documented by Agricola, we emerge into the soaring light of a Gothic cathedral, where another kind of machine, one not of extraction but of celestial celebration, holds court. High within the vaulted nave of Strasbourg Cathedral, a masterpiece of engineering and artistry comes to life, not with the roar of ore crushers, but with the gentle whir of gears and the cheerful crow of an automated rooster. The Strasbourg Astronomical clock is more than a timepiece. It is a theatrical performance in brass and iron, a mechanical sermon designed to illustrate the grandeur of God's created universe. Yet, for all its fame and splendor, the clock holds a secret at its very heart. The names of the brilliant minds who first conceived it are lost to history, making it a timeless monument to anonymous, collaborative genius. Imagine the wonder of a medieval pilgrim entering the cathedral for the first time. Their eyes, accustomed to the dim candlelight and static sculptures of their own parish church, would struggle to comprehend the spectacle before them. As the clock struck noon, a small door would open, and a procession of 12 automated apostles would march slowly past a figure of Christ, each bowing in reverence. A skeletal figure representing death would ring a bell, while a magnificently crafted rooster would flap its wings and emit a mechanical crow, a sound meant to recall Peter's denial of Christ and serve as a call to repentance. Above this pious drama, a complex series of dials and wheels spun tirelessly, tracking the minutes, hours, days of the week, phases of the moon, and even the positions of the sun and planets against the backdrop of the zodiac. This was not merely a clock, it was a cosmological model, a perpetual calendar, and a morality play, all contained within a single, breathtaking cabinet of wonders. For the average onlooker, this blurring of the mechanical and the miraculous was utterly bewildering. The moving figures seemed possessed of a life force, their precise, unwavering motions feeling less like engineering and more like divine animation, or, to the more suspicious mind, diabolical witchcraft. The original 14th century clock, which forms the core of the later, more elaborate Renaissance version we see today, was the product of a unique moment in history. Strasbourg was a wealthy imperial free city, a bustling center of trade and learning, and its cathedral was the proud symbol of its civic identity. The creation of such an ambitious public clock would have required a small army of specialists, a master clockmaker to design the intricate gear trains and the crucial verge escapement that regulated its timekeeping, a skilled mathematician astronomer to calculate the complex gearing needed to model the irregular motions of the planets, a team of blacksmiths and foundry workers to forge and cast the heavy metal components, and supremely talented woodcarvers and sculptors to create the lifelike automata that would deliver the clock's spiritual message. This was a project of immense cost and coordination, almost certainly commissioned by the city council and the cathedral chapter. Yet, in the manner of the time, the individual artisans were seen as humble craftsmen executing a divine and civic vision. Their names were not deemed important enough to be recorded for posterity alongside the glory of the finished work. They vanished into the collective achievement. This original mechanism, a marvel of its age, met a tragic fate. After centuries of service, it fell into disrepair and was eventually dismantled in the 16th century. For generations, the clock's inner workings were a mystery, known only through fragments of descriptions and the magnificent case that remained. This void of knowledge fueled centuries of speculation and legend, with credit for the clock's invention sometimes being attributed to mythical figures or famous scholars who had no connection to it. It wasn't until the 19th century that a team of restorers, led by the brilliant clockmaker Jean-Baptiste Schwilgeret, undertook the Herculean task of rebuilding and vastly expanding the clock. Schwilgeret's own work was a feat of 19th century engineering, but his deep study of the surviving fragments gave him a profound appreciation for the sophistication of the original medieval design. He discovered evidence of highly advanced mathematical calculations embedded in the gear ratios, particularly in the mechanisms designed to replicate the retrograde motion of the planets, a problem that had occupied the greatest astronomical minds for centuries. Modern analysis confirms that the unknown designers of the original Strasbourg clock possessed a stunningly sophisticated grasp of both mechanical physics and mathematical astronomy. They were not just tinkerers, they were scientists and artists who managed to translate abstract cosmic theory into a tangible, moving reality. The clock stands as the ultimate expression of the medieval worldview, a time when science, art, and religion were not separate disciplines but interconnected ways of understanding a single, God-ordered universe. The anonymity of its creators is not a historical oversight but a powerful testament to the collaborative spirit that built the great cathedrals themselves. It reminds us that the most enduring innovations are often born from communities working toward a shared vision, where the collective triumph overshadows individual fame. This celebration of shared genius now leads us to consider a lone draftsman whose personal notebooks, filled with revolutionary ideas, would somehow manage to escape a similar fate of anonymity. While the magnificent clock of Strasbourg stands as a testament to the power of anonymous collaboration, Our next story brings us to an inventor who, despite leaving his name on his work, still found himself overshadowed by the very giants he helped to create. In the bustling, competitive Republic of Siena during the early 15th century, a civic engineer and notary named Mariano di Jacopo, known to everyone as Toccola the Crow, was quietly filling notebooks with ideas that would one day help fuel the engine of the Renaissance itself. Toccola was not a wealthy patron or a university-trained scholar. He was a practical man, a civil servant whose job involved everything from maintaining the city's fortifications to managing its water supply. This hands-on experience with the real-world problems of urban life became the fertile ground from which his incredible inventions grew, captured in 2 illustrated volumes he titled De Ingenuis on engines and De Machinis on machines. These pages are a whirlwind of mechanical creativity, a window into the mind of a man desperately trying to improve his world, one gear and lever at a time. Open one of Toccola's sketchbooks and you enter a world of practical ambition. His drawings pulse with the energy of a city on the rise. He designed massive, human-powered dredges with endless chains of buckets to clean silt from Siena's harbors and canals, ensuring vital trade routes stayed open. He sketched ingenious cranes with complex systems of gears, pulleys, and counterweights for constructing the towering buildings that defined the city's skyline. He reimagined the traditional water wheel, creating designs for mills that could more efficiently grind grain or power the hammers of a blacksmith's forge. But his mind also wandered onto the battlefield, a necessary preoccupation for an engineer in an Italy perpetually torn by war between rival city-states. His notebooks are filled with terrifying and inventive siege engines, assault boats with retractable ladders for scaling seawalls, portable bridges that could be extended from a protected position, and even early designs for explosive mines intended to breach enemy fortifications from below. Every page is a blend of the immediately useful and the boldly speculative, all rendered with a draftsman's care and an engineer's understanding of force and motion. Toccola's true historical role, however, was not as a builder of these machines, but as a crucial transmitter of ideas. He stands precisely at the crossroads between the medieval and Renaissance worlds. His early work still carries the flavor of the anonymous Gothic craftsman, focused on practical solutions to communal problems, but his later drawings begin to embrace the emerging Renaissance spirit of individual genius and theoretical exploration. He was among the first engineers to meticulously illustrate his ideas in perspective, using cutaway diagrams and detailed labels to explain how each mechanism would function, transforming the sketch from a simple reminder into a teaching tool. This shift is what makes him such a pivotal yet often overlooked figure. He was the essential bridge. His detailed notebooks became a kind of circulating library of innovation, studied and copied by the next generation of Sienese and Florentine engineers. His most famous pupil was the celebrated architect and engineer Francesco di Giorgio Martini, who took Toccola's concepts and expanded upon them with greater artistic flourish. And through Francesco's work, these ideas undoubtedly found their way to the most famous notebook of all, the Codices of Leonardo da Vinci. Scholars can draw direct lines from Toccola's sketches of diving apparatuses, paddle wheel boats, and hoisting devices to remarkably similar drawings in Leonardo's own papers. Toccola planted the seeds that others would cultivate into legendary fame. For all his foresight, Toccola's own world largely failed to recognize his genius. His ideas were frequently dismissed by his patrons and contemporaries as interesting but theoretical, too complex or expensive to actually build. He was a dreamer with a pen, not a master with a workshop capable of executing his most ambitious visions. This lack of practical validation, combined with the shifting political fortunes of his beloved Siena, which was gradually eclipsed by Florence, consigned his manuscripts to obscurity. They were scattered, lost in private collections, and forgotten for centuries. It wasn't until the 20th century that historians of technology, digging through archives, rediscovered his work and were stunned by its prescience. They realized that this crow of Siena had been pecking at the future long before anyone else could see it. Today, he is rightly celebrated not for what he built, but for what he envisioned and, most importantly, for what he passed on. His story is a poignant lesson in how the arc of innovation is long and often unfair, where the credit for a revolutionary idea does not always go to its first imagineer, but to the one who has the resources, reputation, and luck to finally bring it to life. Turcola's legacy is etched not in stone or metal, but in the flowing lines of his drawings, a silent catalyst for one of the most explosive periods of human creativity the world has ever known. While the grand architectural machines of Francesco di Giorgio Martini were transforming the skylines of Italian cities, a quieter, more intimate form of innovation was being perfected within the silent, hallowed walls of a medieval monastery. Here, away from the clamor of construction sites and battlefields, a 12th century German monk known as Theophilus Presbyter was engaged in a different kind of revolution, one that focused not on moving mountains, but on mastering the minute, transforming raw materials into objects of breathtaking beauty through the use of clever, workshop-scale machinery. His legacy is not a single towering machine, but a book, a meticulously detailed manuscript titled De Diversis Artibus, or On Diverse Arts, which serves as one of the most comprehensive and revealing technical manuals to survive from the entire Middle Ages. This was not a theoretical text for scholars. It was a practical, hands-on guide for the working artisan, and within its pages, Theophilus unveiled a hidden world of monastic innovation where mechanical ingenuity was harnessed in the service of sacred art. To step into Theophilus's workshop is to understand the medieval monastery as a crucible of technology. These were not just places of prayer, they were vibrant centers of industry and learning, where monks practiced everything from farming and medicine to metalworking and manuscript illumination. Theophilus's treatise covers this vast territory with stunning depth, providing precise recipes for creating pigments, instructions for casting church bells, and most fascinatingly, detailed plans for building machines that would enhance the artisan's capabilities. He describes the construction of a lathe for turning intricate designs on metal chalices and candlesticks, a device that used a cord wrapped around the workpiece and pulled by a bow, allowing for incredibly precise and repetitive motion. He explains how to build automated bellows for a forge, designed to maintain a constant, powerful airflow without requiring a novice to tirelessly pump away by hand, thus ensuring the perfect heat for smelting metal or working glass. These were not inventions for show. They were practical tools designed to improve efficiency, consistency, and quality in the daily work of the monastic craftsman. The sophistication of these devices reveals a mind that deeply understood physics and mechanics. His automated bellows system, for instance, used a simple but effective camshaft mechanism. A water wheel or a hand crank would turn a rotating axle with carefully placed wooden pegs that would sequentially lift and then release a series of bellows levers. This created a continuous, rhythmic blast of air, a primitive form of automation that freed up human labor for more skilled tasks. This principle is directly analogous to the automated systems that would later power the great hammers of medieval forges and, eventually, the programmable looms of the Industrial Revolution. Similarly, his lathe designs show an advanced understanding of rotational mechanics and tool control. For Theophilus, these machines were a means to a divine end. The ultimate goal was not the machine itself, but the beautiful object it helped create, the shimmering stained glass window that would tell a biblical story to an illiterate congregation, the gleaming gold crucifix that would inspire devotion, or the perfectly tuned organ pipe that would elevate the liturgy. The machine was a humble servant to a higher purpose, yet this very context meant that Theophilus's ingenious contributions were largely invisible to the world outside the monastery walls. To the noblemen and even the learned scholars of his era, the work of a craftsman, even a highly skilled one, was viewed as mechanica manual labor, as opposed to theorica, the lofty work of theology and philosophy. The creation of a stained glass window was seen as a pious craft, not an act of chemical innovation. The building of a self-blowing organ was a musical necessity, not a landmark in pneumatic engineering. The machines that made these arts possible were simply tools, unworthy of the same intellectual recognition as a treatise on logic or law. Consequently, Theophilus's name never achieved the fame of a Da Vinci or a Toccola. His work was absorbed into the anonymous collective output of the medieval church. It is only in the modern era that historians and artisans have returned to on diverse arts and recognized it for the revolutionary document it truly is. For historians of technology, it is an irreplaceable window into the tools and techniques that were the bedrock of medieval material culture. It proves that the seeds of automation and mechanical advantage were being planted not only in grand civic projects but also in quiet workshops. For contemporary craftspeople, Theophilus's writings are a revelation. Glassmakers and blacksmiths have followed his 1,000-year-old instructions and found that the recipes and designs work with astonishing accuracy, a testament to his rigorous empirical method and deep hands-on experience. Theophilus Presbyter, the humble monk, emerges not as a simple craftsman, but as a passionate educator and a brilliant engineer of small-scale systems. His legacy is a powerful reminder that innovation is not always about the scale of the machine, but about the precision of the improvement. He perfected the processes behind the scenes, ensuring that the art that inspired millions was itself a product of the highest technological order of his day, setting a standard of integrated artistry and engineering that would be pursued on a much grander architectural scale. If the quiet monastic workshops of Theophilus were laboratories of precision on a small scale, then the bustling, ambitious city-states of Renaissance Italy were the stage for engineering on a truly monumental level. And here, in the competitive courts of Urbino and Siena, we find Francesco di Giorgio Martini, a man whose mind seemed to contain an entire city's worth of blueprints, from the deepest foundations to the highest towers. Francesco was the quintessential Renaissance man decades before the term became synonymous with Leonardo da Vinci, a painter, sculptor, architect, and engineer who saw no boundary between artistic beauty and mechanical function. His true legacy is locked away in a series of codices, volumes of notes and stunningly detailed drawings that reveal a visionary mind grappling with the very problems of how to build the modern world. He didn't just design buildings, he designed the machines to build them, and in doing so, he laid the philosophical and practical groundwork for the entire profession of architectural engineering. Francesco's notebooks are a breathtaking tour through the mind of a master builder. The pages explode with mechanical ingenuity, each drawing a solution to a specific Herculean problem of construction. He designed massive wooden cranes, complex skeletons of timber and rope powered by human treadwheels, capable of hoisting multi-ton blocks of stone and precision, placing them hundreds of feet in the air to form the arches and domes of cathedrals and palaces. He sketched ingenious hoists that used systems of compound pulleys and gear trains to dramatically increase the lifting power a single worker could exert, making the impossible merely difficult. His siege engines were not just weapons of war but marvels of physics, enormous trebuchets with counterweights so carefully calculated they could hurl projectiles with devastating accuracy, and mobile armored towers on wheels designed to safely deliver soldiers to the top of an enemy's walls. But his genius extended beyond single machines. Francesco was one of the first to think systematically about the entire process of construction. He designed machines for every step, excavators for digging foundations, pile drivers for stabilizing muddy ground, and even precise tools for measuring and aligning structures, ensuring that the grandeur on paper could be translated into stability and beauty in stone. Perhaps his most forward-thinking concepts were his designs for the ideal city. Living in an era of constant warfare between Italian city-states, Francesco applied his engineering mind to the problem of urban defense. His ideal city was not a fanciful drawing of beautiful piazzas, but a rigorously planned machine for living and protection. The city walls were not simple barriers. They were complex geometric forms with strategically placed bastions designed to eliminate blind spots and allow defensive cannon fire to cover every approach. The streets within were laid out in rational, grid-like patterns to facilitate the movement of troops and supplies during a siege, while also considering sanitation and efficient traffic flow. He even considered the placement of public spaces and water sources. This was a holistic vision where architecture, urban planning, and military engineering were fused into a single, coherent system. It was a radical departure from the organic, chaotic growth of medieval towns, proposing instead that a city could be rationally designed from the ground up for the safety and well-being of its inhabitants, a concept that would influence urban planners for centuries. Despite this incredible output, Francesco di Giorgio Martini spent much of history standing in the long shadow of his more famous successors. Many of his most ambitious ideas, particularly those for his ideal cities, remained on paper, deemed too expensive or too radical to be built by his cautious patrons. His contemporaries often saw him as a talented but perhaps overly theoretical draftsman. His true impact was as a crucial link in the chain of engineering knowledge. His codices were not private journals, they were textbooks and portfolios studied and copied by other engineers. His work directly influenced the next generation, most notably the young Leonardo da Vinci. When Leonardo began his own notebooks, he was clearly studying Francesco's designs, borrowing and refining his concepts for cranes, gears, and fortifications. In many ways, Francesco provided the foundational language of Renaissance engineering that Leonardo would then fluently speak and expand upon. The tragic irony is that while Leonardo's notebooks became famous for their unfinished brilliance, Francesco's more complete and systematic work was often overlooked as merely a source for the great master. Modern scholarship has finally begun to correct this historical oversight. Art and architectural historians, poring over his meticulously detailed drawings, now recognize Francesco di Giorgio not as a precursor to Leonardo, but as a pioneering genius in his own right. They see in his ideal city plans the origins of modern urban design. In his construction machines, they identify the principles of mechanical advantage and ergonomics that are still taught to engineers today. His work represents a critical moment when engineering began to emerge from its medieval craft traditions and embrace a more scientific, theoretical approach, all while never losing its connection to artistic form and function. Francesco's legacy is a powerful challenge to the great man theory of history. It reminds us that innovation is rarely a single bolt of lightning from a lone genius, but more often a slow, collective burn, built upon the accumulated ideas of countless brilliant minds who never achieved household fame. He was the indispensable draftsman of the Renaissance, the man who drew the blueprint for the blueprinters, and in doing so, helped to literally raise the roof on what human civilization could build. As we leave behind the grand architectural visions of Francesco di Giorgio Martini, we enter a world of pure numbers and celestial geometry, where a different kind of builder was at work, one who constructed not with stone and mortar, but with precision gears and complex calculations. In the bustling intellectual centers of 15th century Europe, a young mathematical prodigy named Johannes Müller, known to the world by the Latinized name Regiomontanus, was quietly revolutionizing humanity's relationship with the cosmos. His workshop was not a construction site but a clean, orderly space filled with brass astrolabes, intricate charts, and the delicate tools of an instrument maker. Here he crafted devices of such stunning accuracy and complexity that they seemed to hold a kind of magical power, bridging the gap between the abstract world of advanced mathematics and the tangible need to navigate, tell time, and understand the heavens. Regiomontanus was a herald of the coming scientific age, a man who believed the universe could be measured, calculated, and understood through the flawless language of mathematics, and he built the machines to prove it. His most famous and enigmatic creation was the Torquetum, a breathtakingly complex astronomical instrument that looked like a skeletal model of the universe itself. Picture a vertical pillar supporting a series of stacked, rotating discs and rings, each meticulously engraved with scales for measuring angles. This was not a single tool but a multi-layered computer designed to seamlessly translate observations between different celestial coordinate systems. An astronomer could take a measurement in the commonly used alt-azimuth system, which tracks an object's altitude above the horizon and its direction, and then, by turning a few precisely calibrated dials, convert that reading into the coordinates of the ecliptic system, which is based on the sun's apparent path through the sky. This was a monumental labor-saving device. Before the Torquetum, these conversions required hours of laborious, error-prone calculations using complex trigonometric tables. Regiomontanus's machine did the math instantly, mechanically, and with a level of accuracy that was previously unattainable. It was, in essence, an analog computer for the stars, a physical manifestation of the most advanced mathematical theory of its day. Beyond this masterpiece, Regiomontanus was a relentless improver of existing tools. He took the traditional planispheric astrolabe, the workhorse of medieval astronomers and navigators, and refined its design with unprecedented precision. His versions featured more accurate scales, better sighting mechanisms, and more detailed star maps, often based on his own meticulous observations. He understood that the key to progress in astronomy was not just new theory, but better data, and better data required better instruments. His workshop in Nuremberg became one of the first centers for the mass production of high-quality scientific instruments, ensuring that his precision tools were available to other scholars, thus raising the standard of observational science across Europe. He even designed mechanical calculators to aid in the grueling computations needed to create astronomical tables, dreaming of a future where mathematics could be automated. Yet, in a world still steeped in astrology and suspicion, this very pursuit of precision was what made his work so threatening. To the uneducated eye, and even to many learned men of the clergy, the Torquetum was an incomprehensible jumble of brass circles. Its purpose was not immediately obvious, its operation required specialized knowledge, and its output was a set of numbers that felt divorced from the familiar reality of the night sky. In an era where comets were seen as divine omens and the planets were believed to influence human fate, a device that treated the heavens as a series of solvable mathematical problems seemed to strip the cosmos of its mystery and, by extension, its divinity. Whispers began to circulate, How could a machine predict the motion of planets? The only explanation for many was that it must be imbued with some form of occult power. Regiomontanus's deep study of ancient Greek texts, which were still viewed with suspicion by some conservative churchmen, only fueled these rumors. His brilliant mind, focused purely on numbers and mechanics, was misinterpreted as a form of sorcery, his calculators seen as divinatory tools rather than the revolutionary scientific instruments they truly were. This cultural misunderstanding tragically cut short his potential impact. Regiomontanus died under mysterious circumstances in his early 40s, a death that some contemporaries attributed to poison, perhaps administered by those who feared his knowledge. With his passing, the momentum behind his instrumental revolution slowed. While his books and tables were studied by a small circle of experts, the profound significance of his mechanical computers was largely lost on the wider world. It would take another century, and the work of figures like Tycho Brahe with his massive, precision-built observatory instruments, for the critical importance of accurate measurement to become a central pillar of scientific thought. We now look back and see Regiomontanus not as a magician, but as a foundational figure in the history of computing and precision engineering. His Torquetum was a direct conceptual ancestor of the modern analog computer, and his insistence on instrumental accuracy laid the essential groundwork for the empirical methods of the scientific revolution. His story is a sobering lesson in how the most powerful innovations, those that change our very framework of understanding, can be the most easily misunderstood, their value obscured not by failure, but by a world not yet equipped to see their brilliance. While the precise calculations of a Regiomontanus represented the height of scholarly intellect, our next story descends into the smoky, uncertain realm of legend, where history and myth fuse into a single, explosive figure. The name Berthold Schwarz, or Black Berthold, echoes through the chronicles of military technology, not with the clear ring of fact, but with the tantalizing whisper of folklore. He is the enigmatic German friar of the 14th century, often hailed as the European inventor of gunpowder and firearms, a man whose very existence is as unstable and volatile as the substance he is said to have mastered. The most famous tale, repeated for centuries, paints a vivid scene: a solitary monk in his cloister laboratory, grinding a mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal in a mortar, only to have the combination ignite with a terrifying roar, shattering his vessel and scorching the walls. In some versions, this was a joyous accident of discovery; in others, a near-fatal warning from God. This powerful image cemented Schwarz's place in the popular imagination as the archetypal mad monk inventor, a genius who unlocked a destructive power that would reshape the world. Yet, when historians sift through the archives searching for the real Berthold Schwarz, the solid ground of evidence turns to quicksand. The first written account linking his name to gunpowder appears not in the 14th century, but over 100 years later, long after the technology was already in widespread use. There are no contemporary church records, no personal manuscripts, no patents or royal commissions that can definitively place him at a specific time and place. This profound lack of primary evidence has led many modern scholars to a compelling conclusion: Berthold Schwarz may not have been a single historical person at all. Instead, he is likely a composite figure, a symbolic placeholder created by later writers to personify the terrifying and mysterious origin of gunpowder weapons in Europe. His name itself is telling: Schwarz, meaning black in German, likely a reference to the soot-stained alchemists and artillerymen who worked with the black powder, or perhaps to the devilish connotations of his alleged discovery. He is less a biography and more a mythology, a story crafted to make sense of a technological revolution that seemed to arrive from nowhere, full of sound and fury. But to dismiss the legend of Berthold Schwarz as mere fiction is to miss its profound historical value. The persistence and power of his story reveal something far more important than a factual origin. They expose the deep cultural anxiety that surrounded the birth of this new technology. For the medieval mind, the first firearms were utterly terrifying and inexplicable. They harnessed smoke and fire to hurl death invisibly across a battlefield, breaking the established rules of chivalric combat where noble knights faced each other in direct personal confrontation. The loud report, the sulphurous stench, the inability to see the projectile that killed you, it all felt less like engineering and more like necromancy. It was far easier to believe that such a diabolical power was the work of a solitary, perhaps damned, genius dabbling in forbidden arts than to accept it as a product of gradual, collective innovation. The Schwarz legend became a container for these fears, a way to process the unsettling reality that human ingenuity had created something so destructively powerful and unpredictable. Modern historians now use the Schwarz myth as a perfect case study in how societies mythologize innovation. We see the same pattern with figures like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods or Icarus flying too close to the sun. When a technology is too revolutionary, too disruptive to the existing world order, we often feel a psychological need to attribute it to a single, almost superhuman figure. This simplifies a complex history and gives a face to a force that otherwise feels impersonal and uncontrollable. The real development of gunpowder was almost certainly a messy, international process. Knowledge of the formula likely traveled from China along trade routes into the Islamic world, where it was refined in devices like fire arrows and grenades, before finally reaching Europe, where craftsmen and soldiers experimented with containing the explosion in metal tubes to create the first cannons and handguns. It was the work of countless unknown chemists, metalworkers, and soldiers, not a lone friar in a single explosive moment. The legacy of Berthold Schwarz, therefore, is not a patent or a prototype, but a lesson in historical memory. He reminds us that the line between inventor and icon is often blurred by time and fear. We cling to the romantic notion of the lone genius because it provides a simple narrative for complex change. His story challenges us to look beyond the famous names and ask about the anonymous collaborators, the incremental improvements, and the cultural currents that truly drive technological progress. He is a ghost haunting the history of innovation, a symbol of our enduring fascination with and terror of the power we hold in our hands. And this journey from the shadowy, controversial figure of destructive power now brings us to a very different inventor, one whose documented work was dedicated not to the art of war, but to the preservation of life. Amidst the backdrop of 14th century Lombardy, a time ravaged by the Black Death and incessant warfare, a royal physician named Guido da Vigevano was quietly performing a kind of intellectual alchemy, fusing the seemingly opposite worlds of healing and destruction into a single visionary portfolio. As the personal doctor to Queen Joan of France, Guido's primary duty was to preserve life. Yet his brilliant, restless mind saw no reason why the principles of engineering couldn't be enlisted in that sacred cause. His life's work, a manuscript dedicated to his royal patron and aptly titled Texorus Regis Franci, the treasure of the King of France, stands as one of the most fascinating and overlooked documents of the medieval period. It is not a treatise on medicine or war alone, but a stunningly illustrated manifesto on how mechanical ingenuity could serve the twin imperatives of survival, protecting the body from disease and the state from its enemies. In its pages, the logic of the siege engine is applied to the sict, and the design of the battlefield becomes a blueprint for public health. Perhaps the most breathtaking of Guido's medical inventions was his design for a wind-powered ambulance carriage. Picture a large covered wagon, not unlike those used by nobles for travel, but utterly transformed by a complex system of gears and sails. Guido proposed mounting a windmill directly onto the chassis of the carriage. As the vehicle was drawn by horses, the wind would catch the sails, causing the mill to rotate. This rotational energy would then be transferred through a series of geared wheels to a large drum or axle inside the wagon. The purpose: to power a set of automated fans or bellows within the enclosed patient compartment, creating a constant circulation of fresh air. For a physician grappling with the miasma theory of disease, the belief that illnesses like the plague were spread by foul, stagnant air, this was a revolutionary concept. It was a mobile, mechanical ventilation system designed to protect both the patient inside from the outside air and the outside world from any contagion the patient might carry. This wasn't just a cart, it was a primitive isolation unit, a testament to Guido's profound understanding that the environment of care was just as critical as the care itself. His interdisciplinary genius extended onto the battlefield as well, but with a healer's twist. Guido understood that warfare created its own specific medical crises, and he designed solutions with a battlefield surgeon's urgency. He sketched designs for lightweight, portable bridges that could be quickly assembled to evacuate the wounded from treacherous terrain, or to allow an army's medical corps to reach those in need. But his most remarkable martial invention was a fully armored assault vehicle that reads like a blueprint for a medieval tank. His war wagon was a covered, wooden fortress on wheels, propelled from within by a crew turning cranks connected to the axles. It was armored with fire-resistant leather and equipped with loopholes for archers and crossbowmen to fire from complete safety. Most terrifyingly, it featured a massive, forward-mounted scythe blade designed to rotate at high speed, cutting down enemy soldiers and horses that dared to approach. While intended as a siege engine, the underlying principle was one of protected mobility, a concept that would, centuries later, define the tank. Guido was engineering not just for victory, but for the preservation of the men inside the machine. Yet, for all its brilliance, Guido's Texorus was largely met with polite indifference by his contemporaries. To the military commanders of his day, his wind-powered carriage must have seemed an absurd overcomplication when a simple horse-drawn cart would suffice. His armored wagon, while fearsome, was likely dismissed as too expensive, too complex to build, or too slow to be practical on a real battlefield. The medieval world, much like our own, was often resistant to ideas that fell outside established categories. A physician was expected to concern himself with potions and humors, not gear, trains, and armor plate. An engineer built trebuchets and cranes, not medical devices. Guido da Vigevano existed in the fertile but unrecognized space between these disciplines, and his work suffered the common fate of the interdisciplinary pioneer, being too practical for the theorists and too theoretical for the practitioners. It is only through the lens of modern medicine and engineering that we can finally appreciate the staggering prescience of his ideas. Today, his wind-powered ambulance is recognized not as a folly, but as a pioneering concept in mobile medical units and infection control. His armored war wagon is seen as a crucial conceptual link between the simple siege towers of antiquity and the complex armored vehicles of the 20th century. Most importantly, Guido's work demonstrates a holistic systems thinking approach that is now the gold standard in both design and medicine. He viewed the patient, the soldier, the vehicle, and the battlefield as parts of an interconnected system where a problem in one area could be solved by applying principles from another. He represents a path not taken in the 14th century, a glimpse of a renaissance that could have embraced integrated design much earlier. His legacy is a powerful reminder that the most profound innovations often occur at the intersections between medicine and mechanics, between war and wellness, between the art of healing and the science of engineering. From the holistic, life-saving designs of Guido da Vigevano, we shift our focus to the raw, earth-shaking power of the battlefield, where the most fearsome machines of the Middle Ages were not the product of a single brilliant mind, but the anonymous collective genius of countless unsung engineers. Picture the scene outside a besieged castle, the air thick with tension and the smell of smoke, the defiant banners of the defenders flying high atop the stone walls. Then a deep, groaning creak echoes across the field as a massive timber arm is winched down against the immense resistance of a counterweight box filled with tons of earth and stone. This is a trebuchet, the grandest and most powerful artillery piece of the pre-gunpowder world, a machine so sophisticated in its application of physics that it could hurl a 300-pound stone projectile over 500 feet to smash through fortified walls. Yet, the mastermind who calculated the perfect ratio of weight to distance, the craftsman who selected and shaped the specific type of wood for the throwing arm to maximize its whip-like action, the blacksmith who forged the massive axle pins that had to withstand unimaginable stress, their names are utterly lost to history. These were the unknown builders, the anonymous engineers whose collaborative intellect created weapons that could literally change the course of history, yet who received no individual glory. The common misconception, often perpetuated by Hollywood, is that these machines were simple, brute force devices, little more than oversized slingshots powered by muscle and sheer bulk. Nothing could be further from the truth. Constructing a massive counterweight trebuchet was an exercise in advanced, albeit empirically derived, physics. The engineers had to possess an intuitive mastery of mechanical advantage, leverage, and rotational force. They understood that the length of the throwing arm relative to the short end holding the counterweight was critical. A longer arm meant greater throwing distance but required a more powerful release. They knew that the sling attached to the end of the arm acted as a force multiplier, its carefully calibrated length and release angle adding a final, crucial whip crack of velocity to the projectile. The choice of counterweight was itself a science. Using loose material like earth and stone allowed the weight to shift and drop more efficiently than a solid block, transferring its energy more effectively into the launch. This was not guesswork. It was the result of generations of accumulated knowledge, tested, refined, and passed down through guilds of carpenters, blacksmiths, and sappers who treated their craft as a closely guarded secret. For the soldiers and nobles who commanded their use, these machines might as well have been magic. They saw the terrifying result, the colossal stone soaring through the air, the explosive impact against a tower, but had little comprehension of the intricate calculations and craftsmanship that made it possible. Chroniclers of the time often attributed successful sieges to divine favor or the sheer martial spirit of the army, rarely pausing to credit the engineering corps that made victory physically achievable. When a particularly spectacular shot was made, like the legendary accounts of trebuchets hurling diseased carcasses over walls to spread illness, it was seen as a stroke of diabolical cleverness from the commanding general, not a testament to the anonymous technician who designed the projectile basket and calculated the trajectory. The machine itself was the star, while its creators remained faceless artisans, their brilliance obscured by the dust and drama of the battlefield. It is only in our modern era, through the fascinating work of historical reconstruction, that we have begun to fully appreciate their genius. Enthusiasts and engineers around the world have built full-scale, functioning trebuchets using only period-appropriate tools and materials. These projects have revealed the stunning precision embedded in their design. Teams have spent days painstakingly adjusting sling lengths, counterweight amounts, and release angles, only to discover that the medieval engineers had already arrived at the optimal solution centuries ago through trial and error. A change of just a few inches in the sling or a few degrees in the hook angle can mean the difference between a projectile soaring to its target or flopping pathetically into the ground just feet away. These reconstructions prove that the master builders of the Middle Ages possessed a profound, practical understanding of concepts like center of mass, rotational kinetics, and parabolic trajectory. They mastered physics without ever writing down a formal equation. Theirs was a science of the hands, the eyes, and the hammer, a knowledge built into the very grain of the wood and the balance of the machine. This collective anonymity is their most powerful legacy. It forces us to reconsider our romantic notion of the lone inventor toiling in isolation. The creation of a trebuchet was a monumental community effort, requiring the coordinated labor of woodcutters, carpenters, rope makers, blacksmiths, and laborers, all directed by the unseen, experienced engineers who held the plans in their mind. This model of innovation, collaborative, incremental, and passed down through practice rather than treatise, was the bedrock of medieval technological progress. It stands in stark contrast to the cult of individual genius that would emerge in the Renaissance. The unknown builders of the trebuchet remind us that history is built not only by the famous names we remember, but also by the countless forgotten hands and minds who turned abstract principles into world-altering reality. Their story, written not on parchment but in the scored earth of old siege camps, sets the stage for a final inventor whose work was as personal and enigmatic as the trebuchet builders was collective and practical. Leaving behind the thunderous, anonymous world of the trebuchet builders, we now enter a far more ethereal and enigmatic realm, one woven not from timber and rope, but from rumor, legend, and the potent power of an idea. In the glittering, intellectually voracious court of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, a Scottish scholar named Michael Scott cut a figure of profound and unsettling brilliance. He was the emperor's personal astrologer and physician, a man so deeply learned that he had traveled to Toledo to learn Arabic and translate the groundbreaking scientific works of Averroes and Avicenna, bringing their Aristotelian commentaries and medical knowledge into Latin Europe. Yet, for all his very real and formidable scholarly achievements, Michael Scott is best remembered not for his translations, but for a far more tantalizing legacy: the persistent, centuries-old rumor that he was a master wizard who had used his knowledge of astronomy and mechanics to build impossible machines. Automated servants made of bronze that could perform household chores, and a terrifying brazen head that could speak prophecies and answer any question posed to it. These stories, which began circulating even during his own lifetime, paint a picture of a man who had crossed the forbidden boundary between science and sorcery. The most famous tale describes Scott fashioning a mechanical android, a silent metal man entrusted with the task of greeting the emperor's guests and attending to his needs. Another, even more chilling legend tells of his quest to create artificial intelligence. He supposedly forged a head of polished brass, and through a combination of precise astronomical alignment, waiting for the perfect configuration of the planets, and hidden mechanical artistry, he gifted it with the power of speech. This metallic oracle could reputedly predict the future, but only if engaged in conversation at the exact moment it became active. A failure of timing would render it forever silent. These narratives were not seen as charming fables by his contemporaries. They were recounted with a mixture of awe and genuine fear, evidence of a mind that had peered too deeply into nature's secrets and emerged with powers that rightly belonged to God alone. To understand why these legends clung to Michael Scott with such tenacity, we must step into the medieval mindset. The 13th century was a period where the lines between natural philosophy, astrology, astronomy, and magic were incredibly thin, often non-existent. A deep understanding of the motions of the planets was essential for creating accurate calendars and navigation, but it was also the foundation of astrology, the belief that celestial bodies influenced events on Earth. For a man like Scott, who could predict an eclipse or chart the course of a planet, that knowledge felt like a form of power over the very fabric of time and fate. To the average person, and even to many of his educated peers, there was little practical difference between using mathematics to forecast a celestial event and using that same knowledge to imbue a machine with a semblance of life. His translations of Arabic texts, filled with concepts and terms unfamiliar to most Europeans, only added to his aura of possessing esoteric Eastern secrets. In a world that could not yet comprehend the mechanics behind complex clockwork, a talking head seemed no more implausible than an accurate astrological prediction. Both were seen as forms of divination, of reading the hidden codes of the universe. While there is absolutely no physical evidence that Michael Scott ever built such devices, and most modern historians dismiss the tales as colorful slander or the exaggerated boasting of rivals, to simply write them off as fiction is to miss their profound significance. The persistence of the Michael Scott myth reveals something crucial about the history of technology, the power of a compelling narrative to inspire future innovation. These stories of mechanical men and talking heads became part of the cultural air that later inventors breathed. They circulated in chapbooks and were retold for centuries, capturing the imagination of dreamers and tinkerers who refused to accept the limits of their time. The legend of the Brazen Head, in particular, appears and reappears in literary works for hundreds of years, a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with artificial life and intelligence. In this way, Scott's fictional automata became a self-fulfilling prophecy. They established a goal, a mythological benchmark for what might be possible if one could truly master the principles of mechanics and natural philosophy. Michael Scott's true invention, then, was not a machine of metal, but a meme of the mind. He became the archetype of the magician-scientist, a figure that would later be embodied by legends like Dr. Faustus, and in a more positive light, by real-world Renaissance magi like John Dee. His story demonstrates that technological advancement is not driven solely by practical need or cold calculation, but also by wild ambition, by stories that dare to imagine the impossible. Before you can build a robot, you must first be able to imagine one. The rumors surrounding Scott, however fanciful, kept the dream of automation alive in the European imagination during centuries when the actual technical ability to create it was still in its infancy. His legacy is a powerful reminder that the blueprint often precedes the building, and that the most world-changing inventions begin as a whisper, a rumor, a seemingly impossible story told about a scholar in an emperor's court who dared to build a man out of brass. While the legends of solitary wizards like Michael Scott captured the imagination of the medieval world, the true magic of the age was being worked not in isolated laboratories, but in the collective, humming workshops of countless nameless artisans. If we shift our gaze from the brilliant few whose names have survived, we find a far more expansive and foundational truth. The breathtaking technological landscape of the Middle Ages was not built by lone geniuses, but by a vast, uncredited community of blacksmiths, carpenters, clockmakers, masons, and weavers. These were Theophilus's contemporaries in the mechanical arts, the anonymous engineers of everyday life whose incremental innovations and shared expertise literally built the world from the ground up, yet whose individual contributions were almost never deemed important enough to record. Their legacy is not in signed manuscripts, but in the silent, enduring testimony of the tools they forged, the machines they perfected, and the structures they raised that still stand centuries later. Consider the humble watermill, a technology so commonplace it fades into the background of our historical imagination. Yet, its evolution across the medieval period is a stunning story of anonymous collective innovation. The basic concept was ancient, but it was the unsung millwrights of the 10th through 13th centuries who transformed it. These master carpenters and blacksmiths experimented tirelessly with gear ratios, designing and refining complex trains of wooden gears that could take the powerful but slow rotation of a water wheel and convert it into the high-speed spin needed to efficiently turn millstones for grain. They developed the camshaft, a simple piece of shaped wood on an axle that could convert rotary motion into reciprocal motion, and in doing so, they unlocked a universe of automation. This one innovation allowed the water wheel's power to trip hammers for forging iron, full cloth, or tanning leather. Nobody knows the name of the millwright who first fitted a cam to a shaft, but that anonymous act of genius created the first automated industrial machinery, laying the absolute groundwork for the powered factories of the Industrial Revolution. Each mill was a unique adaptation to its local environment and needs, each one a testament to the problem-solving brilliance of its unknown builders. The same pattern of collaborative, nameless invention repeats across every facet of medieval technology. The revolutionary printing press of Johannes Gutenberg, often held up as an example of individual genius, was in reality a synthesis of technologies perfected by others. The screw press itself was adapted from machines used for centuries in wine and olive oil production, its design refined by generations of anonymous carpenters. The formula for durable metal type was a metallurgical breakthrough that surely involved the trial and error of countless unheralded metalworkers and alchemists experimenting with alloys of lead, tin, and antimony. Even the oil-based ink was an innovation borrowed from the workshops of Flemish painters. Gutenberg's brilliance was in synthesis and entrepreneurship, in bringing these existing strands of anonymous innovation together into a single, world-changing system. He stood on the shoulders of a giant, faceless community of craftsmen. This collective anonymity was not an accident of poor record-keeping. It was baked into the very social and economic structure of the medieval world. The primary engine of technological innovation was the guild system. Within a guild, knowledge was a communal asset, fiercely protected and passed down through a rigid system of apprenticeship. A young man would spend years under a master, not just learning techniques but absorbing a vast body of tacit knowledge, the exact feel of the right temperature for tempering steel, the sound a perfectly balanced gear train makes, the precise angle for setting a sawtooth. This knowledge was transmitted through practice and demonstration, not through written manuals. The goal was to maintain the high standard and reputation of the guild as a whole, not to celebrate the individual artisan. A master carpenter might spend his life perfecting the design of a more efficient crane hoist, but his innovation would become part of the guild's collective skill set, his name fading away while the improved design lived on in the work of every member who came after him. The focus was on the stability of the community and the quality of the product, not on personal fame. Today, historians and archaeologists are like detectives, painstakingly piecing together the lives of these forgotten innovators. They study the unique tool marks left on ancient timbers, which can identify the individual style of a particular carpenter, even if we never learn his name. They analyze the metallurgical composition of a 1,000-year-old iron object, tracing the source of the ore and deducing the smith's technique. Rare surviving workshop manuals, often just simple lists of tools or diagrams without explanation, provide glimpses into their daily practice. Each of these fragments tells a story of practical intelligence, of men and women who may have been illiterate but who possessed a profound, hands-on mastery of materials, mechanics, and physics. They solved problems with the resources they had, and in doing so, they built the platform upon which the more famous inventors of the Renaissance would eventually stand. This celebration of the anonymous multitude, the true backbone of medieval progress, perfectly sets the stage for our final and perhaps most poignant inventor, a figure whose legendary fame was built upon the very collective genius of these forgotten artisans. And so we reach the final name on our list, a figure so famous he needs no introduction, yet one whose legendary status has, for centuries, cast a long shadow over the very innovators who made his work possible. When we picture Leonardo da Vinci, we see the ultimate Renaissance man, a lone genius whose notebooks seem to burst forth with ideas plucked from the future flying machines, armored tanks, robotic knights. It's a seductive image, that of a singular mind so brilliant it could leapfrog 1,000 years of history. But this myth of the isolated visionary does a profound disservice to the truth. Leonardo did not invent in a vacuum. His astonishing notebooks are not a catalogue of unprecedented originality, but rather the most brilliant synthesis and refinement of a rich, centuries-old tradition of mechanical innovation that we have spent this entire journey uncovering. He was not a lone mountain rising from a flat plain. He was the highest peak in a vast and mighty mountain range, a range built by the obscure medieval inventors who were his true predecessors. Look closely at those famous drawings, and you begin to see the ghosts of al-Jazari in the pulleys and automated figures. Leonardo's studies for a robotic knight, with its complex system of cables and gears designed to simulate human motion, are a direct conceptual descendant of the Banu Musa brothers' automated musicians and al-Jazari's programmable boatload of mechanical entertainers. The hydraulic pumps and water-lifting screws he sketched with such precision owe a clear debt to the monumental, real-world engineering of Juanelo Turriano's Artificio and the sophisticated fluid dynamics detailed in those 9th-century Persian manuscripts. Even his most fantastical visions of perpetual motion, those overbalanced wheels and self-powering mechanisms, are elegant echoes of the same tantalizing puzzles that filled the margins of Villard de Honnecourt's sketchbook 200 years earlier. Leonardo had the immense advantage of access. The ideas of these earlier inventors circulated in the libraries and workshops of Italy, translated, copied, and discussed. He was a magpie of genius, gathering these scattered sparks of innovation from across cultures and centuries, and fanning them into a brilliant, roaring flame with his own unparalleled skills of observation and draftsmanship. His true, unique gift was not invention in the pure sense, but application and integration. He took the existing concept of the gear train, perfected by anonymous clockmakers for astronomical clocks like Richard of Wallingford's, and asked how it could be scaled down to power a portable vehicle or scaled up to move the wings of a giant flying machine. He saw the counterweight principles used in trebuchets and wondered how they could be adapted for a more efficient clock or a more powerful crane. He absorbed the architectural machines of Francesco di Giorgio Martini and the military engines of Konrad Kyeser, and he refined them with a more nuanced understanding of physics and material strength. What made Leonardo exceptional was his ability to see the universal principles underlying these specific machines, to understand that the mechanics of a clock could inform the physiology of a human arm, that the flow of water could model the flow of air over a wing. He was a connective thinker on a grand scale, but the raw materials he was connecting were provided by the collective genius of the Middle Ages. This realization fundamentally changes our understanding of progress itself. It dismantles the great man theory of history and replaces it with something far more powerful and true, the great chain theory. Innovation is a cumulative, collaborative process, a long conversation across time and space. Each of the 23 inventors we've explored added a crucial link to that chain. Gerbert of Orilac transmitted the mathematics. The Banu Musa brothers established the principles of automation. The anonymous masters of the Gothic crane and the trebuchet mastered practical physics. Giovanni de Dondi proved the possibility of complex mechanical computation. This was the sturdy, interconnected foundation upon which Leonardo and his Renaissance contemporaries built. Their machines no one understood were not failures. They were the essential prototypes, the first drafts of the modern world. They were the stepping stones that allowed a later genius to cross the river of ignorance. So the next time you marvel at a diagram of a helicopter in the Codex Atlanticus, remember the monk Eilmer, who first leapt from a tower with wings strapped to his arms. When you see Leonardo's intricate designs for water-powered mills, think of the countless unnamed millwrights who first harnessed the camshaft to automate industry. His fame should not obscure their contributions, it should illuminate them. By pulling these obscure inventors from the shadows and placing them back into the spotlight they deserve, we do more than correct the historical record. We honor the very nature of human creativity itself, a vast, collaborative, and endless endeavor where every builder, every thinker, every dreamer who adds a single idea, however small, is contributing to a cathedral of progress that is forever under construction. Their legacy is the proof that no genius ever truly works alone. And so, as our journey through the shadows of history draws to a close, we're left not with a sense of an ending, but with a profound redefinition of progress itself. The 23 visionaries we've met were not failures, eccentrics, or sorcerers. They were the vanguard. Their machines, far from being follies, WERE, Chinese letter visions, ideas so powerfully ahead of their time that the world simply had to wait centuries to catch up to their brilliance. Al-Jazari's hydraulic symphony in the form of an elephant clock was not a mere courtly amusement. It was a bold statement on cultural unity and a foundational text in robotics. Eilmer's desperate, soaring leap from the Abbey Tower was not a fool's errand but one of humanity's first serious experiments in aerodynamics, a testament to the courage required to test a hypothesis with one's own body. Each story, from the collaborative genius of the Banu Musa brothers to the solitary calculations of Regiomontanus, is woven from the same three threads: relentless creativity, raw courage, and an insatiable curiosity about the boundaries of the possible. These pioneers stand as a powerful correction to the myth of the lone genius who single-handedly bends the arc of history. Innovation is not a lightning strike from a clear sky. It is a slow, collaborative burn, a chain of ideas passed from hand to hand, culture to culture, and century to century. The anonymous engineers who perfected the trebuchet laid the groundwork for the physics that would later guide spacecraft. The monastic artisans following Theophilus' treatises refined the small-scale automation that would one day inspire industrial revolutionaries. Leonardo da Vinci, so often portrayed as a singular phenomenon, now appears to us in his true light, not as an isolated mountain of genius, but as the highest peak in a vast and mighty range built by these forgotten builders. He was the ultimate synthesizer, a magpie gathering the scattered sparks of medieval innovation and fanning them into the brilliant flame of the Renaissance. Their work was the essential bedrock, the first draft of our modern world. This realization invites us to look at our own time with fresh eyes. The impossible machines of today, the quantum computers, the fusion reactors, the deep space probes, may seem like magic or hubris to some. Yet they are simply the latest expressions of that same human drive to push beyond the known, to imagine the next elephant clock, the next Astraium, the next glider. The legacies of these 23 inventors encourage us to embrace bold, seemingly impractical ideas, to protect the dreamers and the tinkerers, and to understand that the path to a breakthrough is often paved with misunderstanding and failure. Progress begins in the shadows, on the fringes, in the notebooks and workshops of those who dare to ask what if long before the world is ready to answer. Thank you for joining this exploration into the deeply creative, often misunderstood heart of the Middle Ages. If these stories of forgotten genius have reshaped your view of the past, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more journeys into the hidden corners of history. The conversation doesn't end here. We would love to hear which of these inventors resonated most with you. Was it the tragic determination of Juanelo Turriano, the interdisciplinary brilliance of Guido da Vigevano, or the collective anonymity of the trebuchet masters? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue to resurrect these lost legends together.